when you think about how you memorize something, it's not just one time and that's it. Especially like if you think of Homer and, epic poetry, you repeat it over and over and over and over again. And then that's how it forms you. That's how you're shaped by it. And then, you pass it on by repeating it again to another person. So it's not just this one-time deal and then we're finished. You use it once and then you're done. That's more consumerism than relationship anyway.
Hello and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn, and as you know, this fourth season we are talking all about story, and in each episode we ask a question and then I have special guests to help us answer it. And so today I'm very excited to introduce you to Lisa and Laura, who wrote a fabulous book called Patterns for Life, which hopefully we'll be able to talk about. But guys, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi, thank you.
I'm really excited to have you guys here. Lisa and I have been talking about some angles to this conversation because both Laura and Lisa love Charlotte Mason, have been Charlotte Mason homeschoolers for a long time. And there are so many interesting facets with Story and Mason. But Lisa mentioned this idea of it being important to reread stories. And that is not something I usually hear talked about in our classical Mason mom world. It seems like we are short on time, or we have a long list of things, or we're trying to get ahead of our kids, we're trying to pre-read new books, all these things that feel like going back to books might be a waste of time, might not be good for our attention. We have a lot of thoughts around this. And so I thought, yes, I would love to talk about this and kind of answer the question, how should we reread books as moms? And so that's what we're going to do today. But before we get started, if we can hear a little bit about each of you and how you came through the classical wardrobe. And Lisa, I will kick it off to you first.
Okay. So yeah, I'm not sure I would even say that I'm in the classical wardrobe. I mean, the term seems to be so nebulous, and sometimes I'm not sure that what I'm doing is what other people would consider classical. But I have learned a lot from people that call themselves classical, and I have very much respect for many of the people that I've come across. But regardless of whether I am classical or not, what happened was when we first started looking into homeschooling, I went to the library, like that's what you do when you're learning about something, and I checked out a book by Kathy Duffy, and she had several different homeschooling styles in there, and you get to take a quiz and find out what your homeschooling style was. And so when I took it, mine landed on Charlotte Mason and classical. So I went back to the library and I got more books, and Charlotte Mason was a little bit like I read her a little bit at that time, but what really got my attention then was The Well-Trained Mind. And so, I read that and I was like, oh, this is great. It's really organized. It's systematic. Everything's laid out. I can just, plug things in and go. But what happened was I joined their forum. And on the forum, somebody started a thread about the Circe Institute. And so once I went down that rabbit hole, it was all over from there. And that's where I really started hearing about Charlotte Mason again, but this time in a new way that, like the books that I had checked out before were interesting, but they weren't really, what kind of made me latch onto her. But going through this thread was what did it. And so ever since then, I've been reading and rereading Charlotte Mason. And that's where I am today. So.
Lovely. There are so many of us who took quizzes to find out what type of homeschooling mom we are. I always thought it was sort of like a shameful, funny thing I did, and now I hear it around. I'm like, oh, this is a thing. This is a thing we do when we don't know where to start. I found an online quiz. You found one at the library, but still, yes. Circe was a tremendous part of my story as well. Their definition for classical education, I thought, caught the spirit of the tradition and gave me more of a life vision rather than something very systematized, ages and stages. So I think we share that as well. Laura, how about you? And also, can you introduce your little guest who might make little picks for us today? Because I already got to hear her.
Oh yeah, she's a little bit noisy. So one of the things I am is a mom of 6. My kids are 17, 14, 12, 7, 3, and a newborn. So here she is. She's just laying on my lap and chilling out. But yeah, the classical wardrobe. I love your turn of phrase for that. I would have never thought of it myself, but it actually started for me when I was a teenager and I read Sophie's World, Jostein Gardner, and I fell in love with philosophy, and I became a philosophy nerd, and I minored it in college. And then when I had kids, I was like, okay, well, how can we do more philosophy? And when you start looking into, like, you know, those sort of things, it points you really only in the direction of classical education. And then I came across Karen Andreola's book, the Charlotte Mason Home Companion. And who doesn't fall in love with her after reading that book, right? Nature walks and tea time, and it sounds so beautiful. And that's when I was sold.
Yeah, those images are very inspiring. I always think they capture the imagination of a mom, and you're like, how do I make this how my child learns?
Yes.
And I'm willing to go deep into, you say Play-Doh, okay, if I need to figure out exactly how I can do this. And then I have to know how you guys met and connected and started working together, because again, they wrote a lovely book called Patterns for Life, which I've actually mentioned before in some of my mother culture videos. So how did you guys connect? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about the book as a helpful resource for moms.
So yeah, we've never met in person yet.
Oh.
Yeah. Someday we will rectify that, but in the meantime, it's lots of chatting, you know, online and video calls occasionally and things like that. But it was through the Scholé Sisters website. We were both on there, and then we started talking. I think it was because we were both Orthodox. Somehow that came through, and so we started chatting. And then as we were talking, we would bring up Charlotte Mason and Orthodoxy and how they came together, you know. And Laura was like, "Well, we should write a book," and I was like, "Okay, let's write a book," you know. And it just happened from there. I mean, it was a beautiful thing.
That's wonderful. Okay, that's so fun. I think sometimes the internet can get a bad rap for like making connections, but then I hear stories like this. I'm like, no, sometimes when you have an interest in things like philosophy or a particular way of homeschooling, it can actually be hard to find people in your local community that you can kind of enjoy these conversations with. And so online, you actually can connect with these sort of very specific interests and really engage and sharpen one another. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for telling me a little about that. Okay, so back to revisiting stories. Let's just start with, why is it important that we even do that?
Oh, I would say it's because if we're doing it right, we're never the same person from day to day. And especially as time goes on, we become a new person. And so, being philosophy nerd, are you familiar with Martin Buber's I and Thou?
No, please tell me.
Okay, so this is a small piece of existential philosophy from the first half of the 20th century. And his basic thesis is that we encounter the world in one of two ways, either as I, it, in which we're a person using an object, and we experience it, and we use it, and we can quantify it, and measure it, and do all these things, or we encounter something as thou, as not like a pantheistic, like, not in that way, but as presence. And books, when we read them correctly, are full of presence. They're full of the presence of the author. They're full of the presence of the story itself. And I believe they're full of the presence of all these other readers who are reading these books with us. So as we change as people, there's always possibility for this fresh encounter with whole universes.
Yeah. And really, when we talk about living books, you know, that's a big Charlotte Mason buzzword, right? And that speaks to that presence that Laura was talking about, where it's an encounter, you know, with a living thing, with, you know, with the author, but also with the ideas that are present in the book. And like Laura said, when we come to reread a book, we're never the same person that we were the first time we read it. We've had new experiences, we've had new encounters with other ideas, with the same ideas in the particular book, but maybe they've been enhanced or, you know, deepened in some way. And so when we come back to it, what we're doing is like we're building this relationship, you know, we're developing an intimacy with the author and with his or her ideas. And it's really, it's powerful, when you go back to a book, especially if you haven't visited it for a long time, and then you go back and sometimes you can just be blown away by the things that you knew were there but had forgotten.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said for it. And I mean, stories, they shape the way we think about the world too, right? So if we're constantly, repeating the same stories and we're revisiting them, we're helping ourselves to build the habits that we want to be, to become the people that we want to be. And then, those habits bring us deeper into relationship with the ideas and, on and on it goes. It's just this endless spiral taking us deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
I think that even explains a bit of why some people feel like an author is a friend.
mhm,
When you've
Mhm.
read maybe the same author across a couple of books or the same books over and over again, particularly throughout your whole life, right?
right.
Then you do actually feel like this person is special to me. Like I do have relationship with this
Mhm,
person. Like when I talk about C.S. Lewis, I do think we are friends. Like he
Mhm.
has been such a tremendous mentor and friend to me through his work. That makes perfect sense. And Laura, I love what you said about the I, it, and the thou. One
Mhm.
thing we talk about a lot over here is trying to regain a posture of being an encounterer in the world. And that would come into our reading as well, that we are not a master. We're not going to come
Mhm.
and manipulate or use to get what we want. That's one of the huge cautions Lewis gives about reading, that you don't come to a book to like take or get from it. The book is going
Mhm.
to do something to you, right? And I
Mhm.
think that is why, one, we do want to return to stories. We want to build
Mhm.
out those imaginations, those moral mythic images that inspire us to become what we behold. But I also think that moms struggle in our modern age with attention already. And so one thing that
Mhm.
we think about is the formal lesson table. And I'm putting the formal there because it is a particular time of day. The formal lessons where we know we should not reread anything to our
Mhm.
children because their habit of attention may suffer. Or we even think beyond that. Again, with Lewis, he wrote that his memory for reading was so great because he didn't have access to books again and again. So he had
mhm.
to really pay attention. So I would love to hear from you guys as we think about moms and their habits of attention. Does rereading possibly risk ruining that attention?
Uh, do you- okay.
No, go ahead.
I don't think I don't think so. I think that like anything, we need to ask what the purpose is, and if the purpose is to develop powers of memory, then we need to keep the end in mind. And the truth is that people have all sorts of attentional abilities, and C.S. Lewis is remarkable in that way. I mean, he's really remarkable.
Yeah.
James Joyce, for example, another remarkable human being. I mean, we all can't. The tables of our memories are not all that big, and our children especially. Well, so obviously we want to avoid, the scenario. It's happened to me where I'm reading aloud, oh da 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 da, and I look up and everybody's staring at the ceiling.
No,
I'm
you
like,
don't
Uh-huh.
say.
right. So I really feel that that's probably what she was talking about. Don't let your kids just stare at the ceiling while you're
Mhm.
reading and then like try to act like I was listening, Mom. Really, I was. It said something about hot dogs, right? So, but the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of our kids have other attentional issues like ADHD or learning challenges and everything. And to hold this rereading thing as like a canon can be unhelpful. I mean, the principle behind it is absolutely true. Let's not stare at the ceiling. But since our children are so different, and the beauty of homeschooling is that we can maximize their strengths and really work with their weaknesses and help them learn to live within them and grow them, then we have to meet them where they are.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and we have to be aware of where we are too, because
Mhm.
most of us have not taken the time to develop, a really strong, powerful memory. Most of us are
Mhm.
public school products. We're not, most of us have not trained our minds in that way. Um, and the other thing I think we need to think about is like why we want the attention in the first place. Like what is it that we're doing when we're paying attention, and that goes back to the idea of building a relationship, and the developing intimacy. So yeah, like Laura said, we can't get hung up on, the idea that, one time and never again. Like that's, like you said, that's the formal, for the formal lessons, maybe you can require that and work on building the habit.
Right.
But it can't be like, don't ever go back to that book again. You read it once, now you should remember it forever. Like it doesn't work that way. And I think people, well, they'll go back and they'll point to the ancients and they'll say, well, they didn't have everything written down. Everybody didn't have a copy of a book, so they had to memorize things, and the memory was the important thing. And that's true. But I mean, when you think about how you memorize something, it's not just one time and that's it. Especially
Mhm.
like if you think of Homer and, epic poetry, you repeat it over and over and over and over again, and then
Yep.
that's how it forms you. That's how you're shaped by it. And then, you pass it on by repeating it again to another person. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just this one-time deal and then we're finished. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because that, you use it once and then you're done, that's more consumerism than
Yeah.
relationship anyway.
Oh, that's
So
such a good point.
yeah.
That's so good. Yes. I think about well, one thing that I loved about your book is that you do bring in Mason's principles and then show how they could be applied in a myriad of situations, because each child is different, each home is different, which I think is the freeing part of principles and philosophy, as opposed to
Mhm.
Charlotte Mason says you cannot reread anything on like an
Right.
Instagram caption, and that's all you got and that's all you heard, and you think that is live or die by this idea, right? And then I think that's what's so helpful about knowing the principle. But one thing that is really interesting, when she actually talks about committing things to memory, the mom is supposed to recite at various points during the day, right? Like you're supposed to learn without labor, she says, yes, but it's supposed to be done over and over again until the
Hmm.
child joins in with you. But you're the one reciting like at bath time, at bedtime,
Mhm.
walking down the trail, all these things. And so you are having these repeated exposures. And I think in a lot of ways that mirrors what we're supposed to do with scripture, what we're supposed to do with
Mhm.
prayer. Like you come back again and again to these things, and they continue to build out what is your picture of truth, goodness, and
Mhm.
beauty, right? What is the standard, so that then you can understand every other story going on around you by those stories. And
Right.
you want to have that like nest egg to be of the best things that you've
Mhm.
gone back to again and
Mhm.
again. That's kind of how I've thought about it with my kids, and that's why we return to our favorite stories over and over again,
Mhm.
which is great for me as well. Now, one thing that I talk about with stories is this concern about being a book glutton. And I know what a book glutton is because I can be a book glutton. And so as I say this, I struggle with it. There is just this really easy way now to be a consumer of books, Lisa, like you were just talking about, to
Hmm.
use them as like a profitable thing for yourself, something quantifiable, something you can master and take and maybe spit back out in a pithy one-liner or something, rather than actually engaging in relationship with the book. And so I think with the classical world, there's the temptation to check off books really quickly. There's a
Mhm.
great list, and we want to read through it, and we want to either get what we need from it or impress others. And so, with the habit of rereading, could you speak to how it might actually make us better readers rather than consumers as we approach all books?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Good. Um, well, my thoughts on that are, to go back again to think about why we're reading. If you're going to consume the books and if you have a list and you're just checking them off so that you can, complete the list and be done, you have to think about like, well, why? Why do I want to get through this list? What is it doing for me? What am I accomplishing? Is it because when I finish the list, I've arrived? So where have I arrived? Like what did that do for me? Or am I reading because there's something more there, it's not about a list at all, but it's
Mhm.
about, my humanity and developing my personhood.
Mhm.
So I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves, like when we choose books and when we think about, which books we want to read, like what is it? What is my purpose in reading this book? And I mean, I start, 10 books at a time and I've got them like all over the house and I'm, just reading them all. People will ask me what I'm reading and I'm like, well, this one, this one, this one, this one, like I have a whole list and they just kind of like look at me like I'm, you know, off my rocker. But um, yeah, so it's really easy because, there's so many books out there. It's really easy to want to
Mhm.
just read them all because they're all exciting and they're all
Mhm.
wonderful and they're all, worth my time.
Mhm.
But I can't read them all. Like there are too many. In my lifetime, I can never read all of the books that there are in the world, worthy as they may be. Like I just can't do it. And so I
Mhm.
have to sit back and think about, okay, well, why am I reading? What do I want to accomplish with it? And, will this book take me to where I want to be? Well, is it going to help develop me as a person in the way that I'm aiming for right now? Or is it something I need to put aside and maybe leave for another time, or just realize that I might never get to it?
Right.
Like I mean, some of my favorite books on my shelves are the ones that I haven't read yet. Like I'll buy books because I know they're supposed to be good. I've heard, from other people that this is a must read. So I'll buy it and then I put it on the shelf and I'm just not quite ready to read it yet. So it just sits there and I pass it and I smile and I'm like, "Oh, look at that book. I can't wait to get there," but I haven't yet. I have quite a lot of those books actually.
Yes.
So,
Are you familiar with Wes Callahan?
Mm-mm.
I've heard the name, but I don't know.
Okay, he's a
Yeah.
classical educator, but he has this great video on YouTube of him walking through his library, and it's very darling because any educator talking about their books, it's like talking about your kids basically. But he says that you should have a library that is large enough that you, when you pass it, are humbled that you will never read every
Yeah.
book in there.
Hmm.
You will never know everything in those books, and yet there will
Mhm.
always be like a treasure to uncover. And
Yeah.
so I've also had books like that I've purchased years prior, like, this is the book. I have like shiny book syndrome for a moment, but it's well spoken of, and I know it's on a great classics list, and all these other people have read and referenced it. And then a couple years later, I actually pick it up, and it's just like the best time to read it.
Right.
And I'm really
Hmm.
grateful that it's on the shelf. But for years, it's just been reminding me, you're a finite person, and you will
Mhm.
not know all of this, nor will you be able to touch all of this good stuff, like you said, that is actually worthwhile, like actually worth your time and your love and your attention.
Hmm.
So, Laura, what do you have to say as encouragement for that one as well?
Well, Umberto Eco, there's a quote from him somewhere where he actually maintains that greater than 90% of our home libraries should be books that we haven't read.
I love that.
Yeah, I wish I could remember where it is off the top of my head, but it's an enormous amount because the purpose of a library is to hold all this information that you don't yet have,
Mm.
right? So if you have a library full of books that you've already been at, then you're not open to all these other horizons. And I think his opinion is doubly interesting because obviously he's an author, and one of the things I've noticed as a writer is that book gluttony has a tendency to drown out our own voices, even when the books are good.
Hmm.
When we are listening or reading or partaking of other and other and other and other, the self, the I that encounters really can be buried underneath that. And I've noticed this when I write nonfiction. I can't read nonfiction. I will start to emulate the voices of the nonfiction readers that I'm writing. And the same thing with fiction. If I'm writing fiction, because I have two published, I have a bunch of other manuscripts, but only two published. And when I'm writing fiction, I have to read nonfiction or I start to emulate the voices of the fiction writers that I'm reading. So I think that to a very large extent, because our society is so saturated with voices clamoring for attention, that gluttony, whether it's book gluttony in particular, it's so beguiling because it's a good thing. And I know I've heard you mention that before, that that's the whole point, is that good things can be distorted. And here's another reference. I can't even remember where I read it, but years ago I read a story about a young woman who came to America from Romania, and she stayed for a couple years and then she went back. And everybody said, "Why did you come back? It was so, you were in America, you had it made, you had the money, you had the life, da 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 da." She said, "I needed space to think beautiful thoughts."
Mm.
So I don't know where that's from, but it's stuck with me all these years because that's the truth behind it. You can fill your brain with everybody else's voice, but we are all unique icons of God. We're all unique created beings. So it's not right for us to be filled with others.
Hmm.
We need to encounter others and relate to others, but we're part of that network too. That's humbling to realize that we're part of that same network as all of these giants.
Right.
Yeah.
at the table. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say one thing that I've really learned from Mason and from trying to form a home around these principles with my children is that like time for contemplation is very important.
Yeah.
You could, even with your children, go from all the great read aloud to read aloud to read aloud. And yet if they don't have time to like mosey around the backyard with a stick poking rocks, if they don't have time
Yeah.
folding hand towels with you on the floor quietly or whatever, they don't have time for ideas to connect. They don't make
Right.
those relationships because there's just so much coming in. And that's true for us as well. I have to purposely, what used to be natural, I have to purposely make space for quiet and for contemplation. And that's actually been really difficult just as a modern person who loves to learn. And so when I came into the classical world, preparing to homeschool, you know, my oldest was a baby when I discovered it. I was like, any podcast, any book, any teacher on YouTube that I can listen to, I need to learn all these things. I don't know how to do this. And you get in the habit of something constantly going. And that's been a really interesting thing as I've actually fallen in love with these books. I've seen this like need to pull back and just sit with it, just have those ideas and roll them around. And motherhood is great for that because our hands are often busy, but our minds can think. And that's why mother culture, ding, ding, works so well, is that you can read and take it into your day.
Yeah.
So kind of pushing on that modern strain that I think a lot of women feel, you can feel guilty about rereading a book that you loved or that you want to revisit because it feels like with the, you know, little time we have maybe to set aside just for ourselves, that we should read something really useful or something that we can kind of quantify the input output from. And so I would love for you guys to share about the literary life of moms, either why it's important or principles you use to guard it and make it rich. Anything you could say as encouragement for the mom listening to have a literary life.
Oh, well, I would start with the most people would find this to be a morbid thought, but the memento mori. Remember that you're going to die.
Yeah.
And what you just said, there isn't time to read all the books. I mean, and when you contemplate the idea of eternity and infinity, I mean, the idea that like 6 more books or more books over here is going to be more than just a drop in the ocean is hubris. There's no time to do even the tiniest fraction of even what's available, let alone what's waiting for us. So humility requires that we encounter the things that are in our path, the books that are put in our path, with patience, the people that are put in our path. Because if we don't have things in the right order, because I've been guilty of this too as a book lover, you know, you read the book when you really need to be, you know, taking care of a person.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is that a lot of times we separate in our minds the work that we do as mothers and our intellectual life, right? But actually, there can be overlap in those. You know, when we read aloud to the kids, that counts as things that are nourishing our own souls as well. I mean, as I was thinking about this question, I kind of made a list of, you know, books that have really impacted me, and they're almost all children's books. Like almost all of them. I mean, Laura just sent me a couple books that she really loved as a kid, and I read them and I love them. You know, in my 40s, I mean, they're fabulous. Like it's not, you don't need to be reading like highly intellectual stuff to develop yourself as a mother. You know, children's books will do it. Like they're where it's at, you know.
Well, sometimes, you know, we overlook the fact that, I mean, children's literature didn't exist for most of human history. But part of what it has created for us, this advent of this phenomenon called children's literature, is that it's forced a subset of authors and writers to communicate so clearly that they can be understood on multiple levels. Because the best children's books that we encounter have so many different levels, which is why they're so good for rereading, is because you encounter it as story, then you encounter it as psychology and spirituality and all these different things, and they play together. And when I look at the history, I mean, I love philosophy, but philosophers are horrible writers. People think philosophy is hard because Kant, great thinker, horrible writer, horrible. I'm like, purple prose. So there's a difference between thinking and understanding and being able to communicate these things well. And So even the genre of children's literature is a misnomer, because I think what we're all really responding to is the clarity of the ideas that are being presented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that my children know philosophy because they've read through the Chronicles of Narnia so many times.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Like, yeah, get Play-Doh coming out of little kids' mouths because they were reading The Last Battle, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's actually one of the most encouraging things for my audience is a lot of moms with young kids. They're trying to prep for homeschooling or they're just in their first couple of years of it. And it is a huge gift that reading aloud to your kids, those books that are on the list are, like you said, Lisa, they're nourishment to your own soul. And even as you continue to think about the years coming, I know moms can get worried about facing things like Plutarch or getting into Paradise Lost with Milton or different things like that, that I have been really encouraged by the works of John Sr. And he has this 1,000 good books list. And his argument at the beginning of it is basically students were trying to come to college and could not read these great philosophical texts because they had not read Frog and Toad and Winnie the Pooh. And he goes through and he's like, you need this rich literary life from the beginning. The clarity is there. They're still amazing living ideas, but they're put in these forms that you track with as you age and you come in these different levels. But you need those. Without Frog and Toad, you're not actually going to fully engage with something like Paradise Lost later. Like you really do need this literary life, and you get to walk it with your kids when you homeschool this way, which is just incredible. I think that's so amazing. I want to read George MacDonald. So guys, guess what? We're reading George MacDonald. We're just going to do it together. And they love it. They love it. And so I think that's actually one of the best things that I figured out is that I'm not reading kids' books all day. I'm reading great books, and we're all coming to read them and love them. And so how well is my time used? So well. And we get to knit our hearts together. We have our little shared jokes about stories, the language, the characters, things like that. I think it brings so much to a home life. I would love to know what books you guys reread, either alone or with your kids. Do you mind sharing?
Not at all.
You go first.
Oh, okay. Well, Lord of the Rings is the big one. So I reread that one, the whole series, all three, when I was in college, at least 10 times. I just, yeah, it is because I can't figure out how I had time to do my homework. And so I don't remember what I did, but somehow I managed. But when I got it out and I read it to my oldest when he was about 5 years old, and not all 5-year-olds are ready for that, but he was. And I read Tolkien aloud, and it was like brand new all over again. His prose is so poetic. It was such a delight to just say the words in the order that he wrote them. It was just beautiful. And we continually read it. I mean, I've read it at least 3 or 4 times since I first read it to him. So that's the big one in our house. And the other one is Harry Potter. That's those are the ones that get read over and over. I mean, yeah, there's a lot, but those two are the big two. Yeah.
Laura, how about you?
So this is going to shock people because I'm very, very literary, but my kids are not big rereaders. Okay. They want something new. They're all at a stage, at least right now, where they want something new in the next thing. So what I've started to do in recent years is go back through my own young adult bookshelves, like Lord of the Rings and other authors I read as a child or a teenager or a young adult. And I've been reading them aloud to my children. So it's a read aloud for me, and it's new for my kids, but it's very much a bonding experience because we end up talking about the context and the history and how I encountered the idea when I was younger, how they're encountering the idea now at their different ages. So I guess just to get in specifics, other than Lord of the Rings, obviously, Diana Wynne Jones. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but some people say that she was J.K. Rowling before J.K. Rowling was J.K. Rowling.
Okay.
And she is reposed. She's no longer with us. But if you're not familiar with her works, they're really worth looking into. Madeleine L'Engle. I'm really big into rereading her stuff with the kids. And actually, we go back to picture books a lot, even with my oldest ones as teenagers, because I have found that the very best picture books are encounters with art. Both verbal art that, because the prose has to be, or the poetry, it has to be spare So it has to be meaningful. So one of our favorite Christmas books is Pearl S. Buck's Christmas Day in the Morning.
Oh yeah.
And somebody's not happy. Anyway, every year we reread this story and it becomes more and more meaningful for all of us. And it's a picture book. And my 17-year-old still loves it when I read it aloud. So
I love that. I think that's encouraging on two fronts. First, for you to say my kids are not huge rereaders. I think it's easy with Instagram and Pinterest to kind of get a Charlotte Mason vision in your head and be like, well, if I was doing it right, my kids would just be jumping for joy in their linen pinafores every time I did anything. Right? But actually, you have children who are full persons on their own and they may not want to do something. And I think that's just good for us young moms to hear. Like, hey, sometimes we had another interview about the literary life of families. And the dad was like, yeah, sometimes you say, let's go read. And they're like, no. Yeah, we're going to, but they're like dragging their feet down the hallway. And it's just good to hear that in the age of like snippets and squares. It's just really encouraging. And also to know that like you go back to things like picture books. Like these things matter. The things young moms are doing, the art they're showing them, the goodness they're trying to bring before them, it matters and will continue to form and like grow that allegiance. I really believe that. And so it's just always good to hear it from a mom who can actually say they're doing it in their home and not just, I know this has to work, in my head. Right. So getting a little bit more practical for moms here. We know that Charlotte Mason wants a wide feast for the children because she wants to put their feet in the largest room possible. Moms are persons too. We have to just remind moms they're also persons. And so they also need this. And Mason's own timetable kind of gives us a fun way to make sure that we are reading widely. So I was hoping that maybe you guys could walk us through the way she organized reading in her day, because she was also a busy lady with many things to do. And yet she read widely and she read consistently. And then maybe some principles we can pull as moms from that.
Yeah. I noticed when I look at the timetable that she spends a lot of time rereading, actually. Like she's got 10 minutes in there for reading a classic author, and it doesn't specify, how she would choose those, but she's got a couple slots where she's rereading her old favorites, like Jane Austen, George Eliot, those kinds of authors. And then she read Sir Walter Scott, all the time, like in a continuous loop. Yeah. So she made a lot of time to reread, but then she also made time for other things too. Like I mentioned the classics, but then also she read books like travelogues, biographies, things like that. And she broke her day up, so it wasn't all at once. And she didn't just read one book until she was finished. She read several different kinds of books all within the same day. And that's possible for us too. Sometimes, if you're getting really practical about it, you can just leave a different book in a different area of the house. And wherever you happen to have 5 or 10 minutes, grab the book that's right there and read that one. So
yeah, that's actually probably the most practical strategy of them all, is to have a different book at all the different places that you are. Which means that some books are going to take you years to get through because you're not, the book you keep in the car isn't the one that you're getting to a lot of the time. But it's there when you have the time for it. Or, so that's the practicality of it. And she read from, you can tell that she cares about stretching herself, but also relaxing herself. And so, this is in any type of exercise, you can't just go strength training all the time. You also have to go for stretching and relaxation. And so you have to read what is feeding you and what's making you a better person. I mean, and we know what's making us a better person. I mean, I've read books where I'm like, oh, this book is making me cranky. I guess this is not an era for me to read Stephen King because it puts me on edge,
Yeah.
That's a very practical, helpful tip. How are the books impacting you? I can't read fiction until my kids are asleep because I will ignore everything. I'm like, you can do whatever, eat whatever, go that way, please.
Yes.
You have to know these things about yourself. I think that's really helpful. And I think what often happens, at least for me, is if I'm only strength training reading, I end up not wanting to read anything. Like, I think that pattern is so helpful to realize, like, you are a limited creature and you need to to work within that. Like that's actually a gift from God that you have boundary lines in pleasant places. It's not something that you're supposed to be bucking up against all of the time. And one thing that I love is that we also know Mason was very up to date on current educational things, like, and maybe that was more part of her like work time that she was reading, but she really did seem to cover the widest spread of anyone I know, never pigeonholing into one thing, never staying just in one time period. She just seemed to have this like really good I'm going to say like habit of progress in all the things rather than trying to check them all off and just be done with them. It was just a continued education, which I think can be hard to do checklisters like myself. You want to be like, well, I finished this book, but like you said, it might take you 8 months to read this one book because you're just slowly moving, and that's actually progress. It is reading, even if you're not closing the book and putting it back on the shelf. Definitely.
Well, one of the other things that's important to reading that is not actually reading, but it's part of her daily schedule, is Charlotte Mason goes for lots of walks. And this ties into what we mentioned before about contemplation. Because we're embodied beings, there's a certain kind of thinking that happens when we're moving our bodies. So walking is just the most accessible form for human beings of all ages. When you're walking outside, preferably, I mean, you can do it on a treadmill. It's possible, but it's not quite the same. It integrates with all these other things that you're experiencing with your body, so you're not just cerebrating when you're encountering these ideas. When you're walking out in nature, you're smelling, you're seeing, you're talking to your kids, you're hearing a bird call. All of these different things are going on, and the cerebrating is happening at the same time. So, I mean, I'm sure there's some science out there that substantiates that this is a very natural and healthy way to engage with ideas, because it is very easy. When we get very cerebral, I don't know about you, I tend to get very abstracted, and you can't do day-to-day life abstracted like that. You can't relate to human beings as an abstraction. We can only relate to each other as encounters, as these individual people, as concrete, real instances of reality. So we are in our heads. We have to get out of our heads too. So,
and that ties back into what we were saying before about, not reading like all the books. Like we can't do it all. We have to leave space to think about what we're reading, and we have to, just take a step back and understand that we are limited, and think about why we're doing what we're doing. I found this beautiful quote by Saint Paisios the other day, just a couple days ago. It was in my daily calendar, but it was about reading. And he said, the goal of reading is the application in our heart of what we read, not to learn it by heart, but to take it to heart, not to practice using our tongues, but to receive the tongues of fire and live by the Spirit of God. If one studies a great deal in order to acquire knowledge and to teach others, without living the things he teaches, he does no more than fill his head with hot air. So, yeah, we have to take the ideas that we're taking in, not only give ourselves time to contemplate them, but we also have to think about how to live them out, and we have to do what we're reading about. And then that brings us, like we have the habit, the discipline of habit, we have the life of the ideas of the mind, and then we have the atmosphere, that brings that third dimension, and it just kind of makes the whole thing complete. It brings us into relationship with each other and with the ideas and with God. It's all intertwined. It has to be, you can't disconnect one from the other.
Right.
So.
Oh, that was so good. That's a perfect place to end. There it is. I mean, we've tied it all back together. I hope that moms are encouraged. I feel so encouraged. Yeah, that's the perfect way to end. So I'm not going to add anything else. I'm just going to ask where we can find you guys on the internet. So any projects you have coming up, I didn't mention this. Everything you've mentioned and everything else you're about to mention will be in the episode notes today for anyone listening to find links to the resources you've mentioned as well as your own work. So for people to find more of your wisdom, where can we find you?
Not very well. Neither Lisa or I are on social media. So
yeah.
But I will say that we have a big project and work in planning stages where we want to become more forward facing and ready to engage with everybody on the internet. We just, well, I have this little one here, so that's kind of messing up the timetable a little bit. But hopefully this year.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. There is a website for the book. I actually don't know it off the top of my head. What is it?
I'll find out.
Patternsforlife.org? I don't know. I can send it to you, but
I will find out for you. I'll make sure it's in the episode notes.
yeah.
I love that. I love to talk to my friends about how I bet that some of the wisest, like best home educators doing this so well are just at home doing it. They're not
Mhm.
online. No one's talking about it. They're not talking outside of their homes. They're just doing it. I just love thinking about that. I just love like the women doing this, like upholding the traditions, bringing in the ideas, doing the habit training with their kids. Like they're just doing it. Like you said, it's not virtue if it's just in your head. It has to come out of your fingertips. Like you have to live it out. And so I love that. When you launch this large project, I will keep an ear and eye out. But if you would let me know, I will update these show notes
Sure.
so that then it is available for anyone to come and to find it. But Lisa, Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. It was truly a gift to have you on The Commonplace.
Thanks for
It's
having
been fun.
us. This
Thanks.
was great.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone else, I'll see you in 2 weeks.